Legends and myths of the Vikings are as vast as any other culture in the world. People are thrilled to see the thunder god Thor in his many pop culture appearances, and whole families around excited when they learn they have 3% Scandinavian on their Ancestry.com results. But what do people really know about the Vikings? Most people believe that they were a murderous and bloodthirsty group of marauders who raped and pillaged their way through the old world. While some of this is true, as always, the reality is pretty far from the myth. For starters, they weren't actually called Vikings. The term actually came about during the 11th century, when the church was trying to turn the people against the paganistic culture of the Norsemen. What we refer to nowadays as Vikings was actually a loose collection of tribes and clans that were the ancestors of the lands of Scandinavia, residing in Denmark, Sweden, and Norway. The word Viking is actually an Old Norse verb, which referred to the act of raiding or piracy. The Norse people weren't unified either. This was long before the idea of a unified Scandinavia as well, when the various tribes and clans spent just as much time fighting and raiding amongst themselves as they did with any foreign lands. The act of raiding wasn't the only occupation that the Norse took part in either. Much like any other cultures, there were many different jobs that one could take up. Farming was how most families survived, while also raising livestock. While sea voyages to discover new lands to trade in commerce took place just as often as raiding. It was actually the Norse people who first settled in Iceland and were the first non-native people to land on the shores of what is now North America. The Norse culture was based heavily around the warrior, however, with every family expected to be able to defend themselves and the clan as a whole. To this end, citizens were allowed to be openly armed at all times. When one thinks of the ancient world, usually you imagine that everyone was dirty and smelled awful. With the Vikings, this was not true. Discoveries of sites have proven that the Norse culture thought very highly of personal hygiene. Tweezers, combs, razors, and even ear cleaners were all crafted from bones. Most people took baths at least once per week, as well as swimming in the hot springs. This is actually much more frequent than any other European cultures during the time period. As mentioned before, the Norse people were very big on trade and commerce. Unfortunately, that meant that, like many other cultures of the time, one of their trade was people. The Vikings were big into the slave trade and would take many of their captives from the various societies that they raided. These slaves were known as thralls and would be sold throughout Europe and even as far as the Middle East. Most people are aware of the Viking funerals, that of the Viking lords who were placed in one of their longships and set afire while floating away. This was given as the highest honor. It was believed that the fire and smoke would help the warrior find their place in Valhalla. I will end this short set of facts with one that truly makes me sad. The Vikings did not, in fact, wear those awesome-looking horned helmets. Records show that very few Norsemen actually wore any kind of headgear for combat, and the few Viking helmets that have been discovered did not, in fact, have horns at all. Those myths were most likely created during the 11th century by the church to make the Norse people seem more monstrous than they truly were. Thank you for joining us today, and if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more Tales of Earth, and please let us know in the comments down below if there are any other mythologies or various groups of people from Earth that you would like to know about. Till Valhalla, my friends.